We have some quickly changing legal news regarding Trump's attempt to freeze domestic federal aid programs. His administration issued a memo saying all programs were going to be frozen today, Tuesday, and he was quickly brought to court by nonprofit groups saying that this is congressionally appropriated funds and you as the executive don't have authority to just stop the aid and stop these programs. As we know, this was already starting to create chaos because they didn't even know what this memo meant. Is this just aid that's going to individuals? Is this going to aid that's getting dispersed through the states? It was already very confusing. And so the judge, never mind, really detrimental. And so the judge issued an emergency hearing to hear all sides and then issued a temporary administrative stay, saying that this memo, this freeze of this federal grant money cannot go into effect until 5 p.m. on February 3rd in order to allow the litigation to go forward. Essentially, does Trump have the authority to do this? And not only that, whether or not it's the difference between executive and congressional authority, these nonprofit groups are arguing that he, in his targeting, let's say, of certain grant money, is specifically trying to restrict speech. So my name is Dina Sayegh Doll with the Legal AF channel. Let's break this all down. So I'm just going to read from the lawsuit that was filed that then enabled this administrative stay to go forward because they very articulately put forward the arguments. This is what the judge relied on. The judge's name that issued the administrative stay was a federal district judge, Lauren Alcon. Hopefully I'm pronouncing that name right. And she was appointed by Biden. And in this lawsuit, the parties suing is the National Council of Nonprofits, the American Public Health Association, the Main Street Alliance, and SAGE, and they are suing the Office of Management and Budget, which is the one that issued the memo, as well as the acting director. And they say, quote, just yesterday evening, reports surfaced that the acting director of the Office of Management and Budget issued a memo entitled Temporary Pause of Agency Grant, Loan, and Other Financial Assistance Programs. The memo purports to require every federal agency to temporarily pause all activities related to obligation or disbursement of all federal financial assistance and other relevant agency activities that may be implicated by President Trump's executive orders, including but not limited to financial assistance for foreign aid, non-governmental organizations, DEI, woke gender ideology, and the Green New Deal, effective today at 5 p.m. That is what the memo had put out. As we know, it's not effective yet. They're just a couple of days now for them to sort out this litigation. They might be able to get a longer injunction in place. As of now, it's just a stay. And the pleading goes on to say, in practice, the memo purports to eradicate essentially all federal grant programs. The acting director only stated basis for doing so is his belief that, quote, financial assistance should be dedicated to advancing administration priorities and that the use of federal resources to advance Marxist equity, transgenderism, and Green New Deal social engineering policies is a waste of taxpayer dollars that does not improve the day-to-day lives of those we serve. Okay, so we see here kind of the argument playing out that the nonprofits are saying this memo is being tied specifically to how the organizations receiving the money might talk about, right, transgenderism, or might talk about the climate. They have the DEI, the diversity. They're targeting all the things, the values, let's say, the values that the Democrats want. And they're trying to say, you can't get the money if you are aligned with these values. Essentially, Trump trying to use his bully pulpit to not allow money that, first of all, is paid in by taxpayers all across the country, Republicans and Democrats, and authorized by Congress. And he's trying to punish people for having values that he doesn't like. And he's using taxpayer money, withholding taxpayer money from these grants as a way of doing that. So the nonprofits are suing the Trump administration under 2 counts. One is the First Amendment, which we'll talk about in a little bit. And the other one is that they're alleging that this memo is a violation of the Administrative Procedure Act, because the Administrative Procedure Act requires that any agency action not be arbitrary, capricious, an abuse of discretion, or otherwise not in accordance with the law. And so they are arguing basically that this memo is all these things, that it's arbitrary in nature. It doesn't acknowledge like the severe catastrophic consequences that will result as an immediate across the board freeze on federal grant programs. And we're talking about, thousands, if not millions of people and organizations that rely on this. And this is just, they do it with just a few hours notice. And then also talking about how much of a disruption it will cause and why the court should get involved, why they should review it. And the court did get involved and at least said, we need more time to litigate this. We need more time. We need to have the arguments. We need to have the evidence to figure out whether or not this is illegal or an illegal action under the act. But they at least got that initial stay, so there wouldn't be an immediate stop of federal grant money. Now, their second count having to do with the First Amendment, I completely agree with and makes a lot of sense, because when he talks about in this memo, they're not just saying a freeze, they're really pointing out because they're trying to speak to their MAGA base, they're pointing out some values. We know that transgender issues they feel like is a winning issue for them, so they're specifically calling out these things. And so in the litigation, the nonprofits talk about how when they're tying it to this is actually a violation of the First Amendment rights of these organizations. And they say in their filing, quote, the memo makes clear that recipients of federal funding who are determined to have expressed or advocated for, or perhaps even merely associated themselves with political, personal, and moral viewpoints disfavored by the administration will not receive further funding through federal financial assistance programs. For them, the pause is anything but. Because the memo conditions the continued receipt of billions of dollars or more in federal funding on recipients' exercise of their First Amendment rights of free expression and association, it is regulated by the First Amendment. Because the memo conditions burden core political speech and association rights and expressly discriminates based on viewpoint, it is subject to strict scrutiny. And as we know, the strict scrutiny means how much scrutiny a court gives to a government action. If they see that the restriction is content neutral, that it might restrict speech, but it wasn't based on the type of speech, then the government action gets like intermediate scrutiny and the government action is allowed to be more restrictive. But here in this memo, they clearly point out DEI, transgender, Green New Deal, the type of speech. And so they're saying, then that means the court should have strict scrutiny, which really means the government has to have, in order for a law to satisfy scrutiny, they have to really argue that there wasn't a less restrictive means to carry out their intent. So that way they don't restrict free speech, which will be really tough here considering the memo specifically outlines that type of speech. So really strong argument from these nonprofits that, hey, you're saying that if we talk about these issues, if we have advocated in the past for these issues, if we have associated with organizations that have talked about these issues, we're now getting punished for it. And that essentially is punishing our free speech. So definitely we'll continue to follow this on Legal AF. But what's happened now is we had the memo go out trying to freeze it immediately, essentially. A lawsuit quickly filed to try to stop this, an emergency hearing from the judge putting an administrative stay until 5 p.m. on February 3rd to allow these issues. Essentially, did they violate the Administration Act? Are they violating free speech to get looked at before Monday, and possibly they will have, some sort of injunction to give them even more time past the Monday deadline. We'll definitely update you here on Legal AF with the developments.
In collaboration with the Midas Touch Network, we just launched the Legal AF YouTube channel. Help us build this pro-democracy channel where I'll be curating the top stories, the intersection of law and politics. Go to YouTube now and free subscribe at Legal AF MTN. That's at Legal AF MTN.